in Judges 21:25. The time of the judges was one where people did what was right in their own eyes. But this wasn't just true of the people. This was true also of the religious leaders, especially these men, Hophni and Phinehas. Hophni and Phinehas were brothers. They were sons of Eli and priests at Shiloh. We read that in 1 Samuel 1, verse 3. Eli was a judge of Israel for 40 years, and he mentored Samuel. Now, the Phinehas of this duo is not to be confused with Phinehas, the grandson of Aaron the high priest, who was zealous and loyal to Yahweh, and who also accompanied the ark, which this Phinehas did too. But this man, who was the grandson of Aaron the high priest, was the exact opposite of Phinehas, the son of Eli. Now, Robert Bergen in the New American Commentary kind of sets up this story, and he says the tragic story of Hophni and Phinehas, which is to be read in light of Leviticus 10, 1 through 11, demonstrates the seriousness with which God takes priestly misconduct. And Leviticus 10, 1 through 11 actually outlines the character of a priest, how he is to live. Now, how do they contribute to this narrative? How do they fit into the plot? Well, they serve as the poor example, which allows Samuel to rise, to shine as the good example. And they are not dynamic characters. They don't last beyond this story. They're static. They stay right here in chapters 1 to 4, and they're forgotten. Now, what was the deal with Hophni and Phinehas? Why were they so bad? Well, first we read in 1 Samuel 2, chapter 12, it says, "Now the sons of Eli were worthless men. They did not know the Lord." Now, that's a shocking statement to make for those who are supposed to be serving God as priests. But their relationship with God is blind and fake, right? So not only did they not know the Lord, but they ignore their father's correction. Their father actually corrects their actions later, and they ignore his correction. They also miss the example of Samuel and God's call on his life. Not only that, they use and abuse God's people for their own selfish desires. Now, what am I talking about here? Well, in chapter 2, verses 13 to 16, it describes the situation where the priests of the day are supposed to use a fork, and they're supposed to stab the meat that's going to be offered as a sacrifice to God after it's cooked, after it's been boiling, and what they take is what they get. But Hophni and Phinehas insisted to choose the choice meat when it was raw. They were greedy. And Dale Ralph Davis actually points out that according to Levitical law, they were allotted the breast and the right leg. But these men wanted more. They wanted to choose exactly what they got, and maybe even get more. So they were really greedy, and they were going to offer to take it by force if the people fought them on it. But they were also enslaved by lust. We read in chapter 2, verse 22, that they would actually sleep with the women who were trying to serve God at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And Bergen says this about this situation. He says it affirms that other things are no substitute for relationship with God, that pedigree or social power is not an alternative to purity. We know many men who've fallen to lust and lost their platform for ministry. But Hophni and Phinehas also had a poor reputation among the people. We read that in 1 Samuel 2, verses 23 to 24. And they were in part responsible for the capture of the Ark of the Covenant. We read that in 1 Samuel 4, verse 4. They were there during the Battle of the Philistines, and they helped lose the Ark, essentially. And all of this was so bad that we read in chapter 2, verse 34, that a prophet, an unnamed prophet, came to Eli and said, "And this that shall come upon your two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, shall be the sign to you. Both of them shall die on the same day." And they died in battle with the Philistines. You can read that in 1 Samuel 4, verse 11. And then when Eli heard the news, over in verse 18, he actually fell over, broke his neck, and died. Now, how do these characters fit overall? What is the purpose? How is the author using them? Well, really, they just serve as a bullet point in the life of Samuel. Samuel was indirectly contrasted with Hophni and Phinehas in Scripture as he weaves through their story. And what do we learn from this? We learn that God uses unfaithful men as a teaching tool and a warning for those faithful men he has called to serve him. This is really a wake-up call for all of us who serve the Lord in leadership, teaching, and especially vocational ministry. John MacArthur said this. He said, according to Scripture, virtually everything that truly qualifies a person for leadership is directly related to character. Integrity is the main issue that makes the difference between a good leader